Did Jabba the Hutt have sex with Princess Leia or any of his other dancers? When I first saw Return of the Jedi, I knew it was gross how he acted with Leia, but as I got older, I questioned why. I mean, why would a Hutt, basically a giant space slug, make sexual advances on a humanoid? Is what he is doing sexual or not? If yes, that spawns a flurry of questions like, how would that even work?
I don't know. Fly casual.
There's no question it's downright vile watching Jabba getting fresh with Leia, and although the sexual undertones were implied in the movies, more was left unsaid. Much like the tragic youngling scene in Revenge of the Sith, you can kind of fill in the gaps. First, it was with her attire, the unwanted advances, lip-licking, chain-pulling, until Leia did some chain-pulling of her own. But what's the real point of Jabba the Hutt surrounding himself with a plethora of beautiful humanoid dancers and slaves? There's gotta be a motive for it. Is it sexual or simply a crude show of status and power?
What's going on?
So I did some research, and what I found was pretty shocking.
Tell me.
Jabba's affection for dancing girls is not common to all Hutts, seeing as they were a different species entirely. It was more of a perversion somewhat isolated to Jabba. It was also revealed by Pablo Hidalgo at Celebration Anaheim that Hutts have separate sexes in canon, no longer being hermaphrodites as they were in Star Wars Legends continuity, which means they had both sexes. So Jabba being a specific Hutt who took pleasure in surrounding himself with bikini-clad dancing girls, but he wasn't actually necessarily the only Hutt to do so. In Legends, it was explained on numerous occasions that yes, in some manner, Hutts could and would have relations with humanoid creatures as far back as early as the Return of the Jedi novelization.
Why didn't you tell me?
When Leia was captured after a botched rescue of Han Solo, it was revealed in Tales from Jabba's palace. To Leia's discomfort, Jabba licked her face with his over-exocentric tongue. She was then forced into replacing Oola as Jabba's favorite slave girl. Several of the dancers stripped her of her costume and put her slave costume on her in front of the audience. Now that's brutal. During this time, she was forced to wear a skimpy metal bikini costume and endure the shame and humiliation of being a captive of the Hutt. She was kept beside Jabba on his large throne, kept on a metal leash. The night after a captivity in Tale of Boba Fett, she was offered to Boba Fett by her new master. However, Fett was not interested in the enslaved princess and went to sleep after arguing with her. That is what we learned of Leia in the Tale of Boba Fett. Basically, Jabba stripped her down and he was like, guess what, Boba? You're the best bounty hunter I have. You get first shot at her. And he said no, and then he got a little quarrel that pretty much confirmed that Jabba was pimping her out somewhat. And it was shown that other Hutts were taken aback by Jabba's whims. In the Hutt's Gambit novel, it was said Arik was not one of those sybaritic Hutts who relished the pleasures of the flesh. True, he was a gourmet and often a gourmand, but he didn't maintain entire palaces filled with slaves to cater to his slightest or most perverse whim the way some Hutts did. So this is another Hutt that likes food, but not the perversions. Arik had heard that Gilead's nephew Jabba kept several female dancing humanoids of all things, on leashes near him at all times. Arik considered such indulgences distasteful and extravagant. This Djilic clan had always had a weakness for fleshy pleasures. Gilead's taste was better than Jabba's, but he enjoyed hedonistic excess just as much as his nephew. In the canon Rebel Dawn, Jabba admires a woman's figure, but there is not anything explicitly sexual in the admiration. His feelings could be closer to how someone might want to dress up a cat or a dog. Jabba watched Bria Tharon as she walked away and found himself thinking that she'd look magnificent in a dancing girl's costume. All that reddish hair spilling down her bare shoulders, nicely muscled. This human was fit, exquisitely so, and her height was impressive. What a dancing girl she'd make. Now, other characters in the EU have impressions of what the dancing girls mean to Jabba versus Rebel Dawn. Rebel Dawn, it seems they've cleaned it up and they've gone, hey, in canon, he's not sexually attracted to them. But in the expanded universe, for example, Dengar in the Mandalorian armor, Dengar could barely recognize her. He remembered her from Jabba's palace. She had had been one of the obese Hutt's troupe of dancing girls. Jabba had liked pretty things, regarded them as exquisite delicacies for his senses, like the wriggling food he'd stuffed down his capacious gullet. And just as with those squirming tidbits, Jabba had savored the death of the young and the beautiful. So that heavier girl that we saw in Return of the Jedi, he liked watching them squirm, and it's something that Dengar took note of. And Porcellus in Tales from Jabba's Palace said Porcellus had never learned exactly what Jabba did with his pets, usually female, but always young, lithe, and beautiful, but he knew they seldom lasted long, and he'd heard some truly horrible tales from his friends and fellow slave Yana the Asgardian. At that moment, however, all the Hutt did was scoop up a fingerful of vegetable crepe stuffing and hold it out to her, and after a moment, with visible distaste, Oola licked the subtly flavored concoction from his slimy fingers. So we know that Jabba liked the power over humanoid creatures, like pets. In Return of the Jedi novel, when exploring the backstory of Oola specifically, things took a really dark turn for me, especially because that's a novelization about an actual film. It's now Legends, but this is, morbid. Jabba was immediately enamored with her and chained her by the neck to his throne as his personal property and slave girl. Oola was forced to dance for him as well as give pleasure when the depraved crime lord beckoned. But she was determined to escape from a horrible existence one way or another. Defiled and miserable, fed only scraps, she could not decide if it was better to keep enduring the Hutt's carnal embrace, which means sex, until escape was possible, or to die cleanly and escape that way. Now this is where it gets messed up. Remember, Return of the Jedi novelization is before any of this other stuff has been written, so this is like the grandfather of Jabba's smart. Oola chose to refuse Jabba's advances at least once before her final dance and was thoroughly beaten by his Gamorrean guards for this act of defiance. This beating was conducted scientifically so as to not leave her with any disfiguring bruises. This is messed up. So here's the more messed up part, if this is even possible. Later that day, Oola was able to speak briefly with C-3PO, who told her that Luke was indeed going to return to rescue them, and her hope was renewed. She's gotten beat up. She was imprisoned. She's just like, okay, I'm gonna get out of here finally. Now her spirits were high for the first time since her imprisonment. Oola performed the best dance of her life, which also would be her last, which we see in Return of the Jedi. Enticed by her performance, pulled her chain, wanting more than dance from her. Having suffered such invitations before, Oola refused, grabbing her end of the leash. As she hauled back on her chain and pleaded with Jabba, he became angry and tugged harder, bringing her over the trapdoor in front of his throne. She was eaten alive by Jabba's Rancor after Jabba dropped her into the Rancor's pit. In a nutshell, it's 3PO's fault.
Oh my goodness.
Again, in a nutshell, it's heavily implied for the most part that Jabba had sexual relations with slaves, which has been taken out of canon. Now it's shown that he sees them more as pets, Oola being the only solid example that did occur in Legends, although thank God it didn't happen to Leia. If Luke hadn't rescued her, Boba Fett no doubt wouldn't have been the only one offered up with such a price. But hey, that's all in Legends, so it may be rewritten, though unlikely Disney will ever go to such a depraved place like they did. I cannot believe it. Whether it is the fan art or it is just the stories that I've told you, which are direct out of novelizations, this is pretty freaking intense. Anyway, the beauty of this video, it is just the start of the discussion. Our love for Star Wars surrounds and it binds us together, so let me know in the comments below. What do you think about all of this revelation? I mean, it's crazy, because if you love Star Wars, I want to talk to you about it. It's simple as that, my friends. If you want to stay up to date with the latest Star Wars videos on origins, games, and theories, don't forget to use those force powers of yours and hit subscribe. And hey, leave a comment below about what you want to see in future videos. It may just get covered. Thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you. Always.